Well, things are going along very nicely. I'm very happy with the back, but I've kept a deep, dark secret from you, and I will reveal it now. This piece is 5mm shorter than the other three, and I don't know how I did that, but I've obviously made a mistake somewhere along the line, and I've got a problem because this is now too short for the height of the carcass. And what I'm going to do is to make use of this bottom shelf to mask the cut and the fill that I'm going to do in this piece. So I'm going to cut this component behind the shelf here. I'm then going to move the bottom bit down and fill in with a very thin 5mm strip of this material behind the shelf bit here, and that won't notice. So the next bit, I'm going to fill in these holes like we did before, this hole here too, and we'll then get on to pinning the back panels to the carcass. While the fill is drying in the holes, I will set about fixing this minor mistake. Not that minor. So what I've done is to position this particular piece with just under 1mm showing above. I've lined it up with the side of the carcass, and I'm just going to draw a line to show me where that component hits this bottom shelf. I can now measure the thickness of the shelf. So the next thing I'm going to do is to get myself a piece of material that's going to fit between the two, that sort of matches. I found a bit that matches, that's a pretty good fit. I'm going to set my marking gauge to 9mm because I want the filler piece to be slightly higher than the components either side of it, so that I can plane it down flush after I've glued it in place. That's deep enough, and I can now cut this bit off to the right width. Let's see what that looks like. And it will go on like that, so you won't see it. First thing we need to do is to clean up all our filling in work that we've done, which has dried overnight and should be ready for me to go to work on. I'm going to start off by using a chisel to pare off the very high bits and the beginnings of the glue. I pared off the glue and the remains of the barbecue sticks on all the pieces, and then sanded them first of all with 120 grit and then with 320 grit. And that's what they look like now, considerably better. I'm going to use an eraser to get off these marks too while I'm at it. Great, now it's time to start pinning and gluing those onto the back of the spice rack. The next bit of video you're going to be watching is again time-lapse, I'm afraid. Not my fault, I think it's the iPad. I think it's possessed, and I'll get a priest in to have a look at it, but in the meantime we're going to have to live with it because I can't redo what I've done. There's a few things that I have not made clear in my speeded up version. The first thing is that it's quite important to have the back overhanging either side of the carcass the same amount. And the way I did that was to measure the width of the carcass, measure the width of the back, divide it by 2, and then set up a marking gauge to draw a line down either side of the back, go over it with a pencil, and then you can position the carcass exactly in the right place. The other thing was that I put pins in at about 15mm from the edge of each of those back slats so that they wouldn't split the wood. The next thing is that I measured the positioning of the pins on either side of the back panel so that the first pin was about 25mm in from the top and 25mm in from the bottom, and then I just divided up the remaining gap into, I think, 4 separate sections. Just important that you take into account that you've got an overhang when you're positioning the pins going down the side, otherwise you end up with the pins not in the centre of the carcass and they can mess your work up. Sorry about that. We'll get on now and you can have a look at the speeded up version. Now we're approaching the end of the project. I'm determined not to make any silly mistakes, and I've got one potential mistake coming up here. If you notice, there's not much overlap between that part of the back panel and the shelf. And if I try and put pins in really close to the edge of this piece of wood, there's a strong likelihood that it'll split. So what I'm going to do is to drill a very small pilot hole at an angle so that there's no way the pin's going to come out inside the drawer cavity. And that way I'll be assured that not only will I get a fixing, but I won't get any splitting as well. Draw myself a line. Make a mark as usual. And then I'll get a very small drill bit, just slightly smaller than the diameter of those veneer pins. This is a 1mm drill bit and it'll snap like a carrot if I'm not careful, so I will be very careful. I tend to rest my hand on my chin to steady it when I'm doing this hand drill work. I'll take that out because I've broken more drill bits dropping it down the surface and I've had hot dinners. We'll do what we did before and we'll pop those pins in so that they're just poking out the other side, and we'll just check that they're going to go into the shelf in the right place. Just, can you see? Very close. This pinprick is a little bit close to this edge for comfort, so I'm going to re-drill this hole at a steeper angle to make sure it hits that shelf higher up. That looks much better, you can see. And while we're at it, we'll mark up where the remaining holes are going to be. And as we put a drill bit handy, maybe I'll just pre-prepare those holes. Maybe we get putting too many pins in, a bit like cobbling rather than carpentry, but better too many than too few. Do this one first while I remember the angle. Too far because it will want to split still. Good. Just mark up where the pin should go into this last piece. The holes look as though they've come out in the right place, which is good. I'm quite keen to put a fair amount of glue on this end grain because we don't want it to shift at all in the process of planing or whatever. And whenever you're gluing end grain, as I think I've mentioned before, a lot of the glue gets sucked into the wood fibres, so a reasonable coating is what you need. And we'll just put a line of glue around the rest. And a little bit on that chamfered edge just to ensure that doesn't move once it's in place. And as I did last time, I just smooth that a bit so we don't end up with glue on the chamfer. So I'll put plenty of pressure. I'll put my leg against it, really pull that down so that it's squashing that filler piece.